I parked my car at the edge of the small Vermont town, staring at the quiet streets. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the smoke and noise of the city I had just left. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, heart heavy with the weight of everything I had lost. Work, marriage, friends who had drifted away. I carried them like stones in my chest. Each stone pressed down harder as I realized I had no idea where to start. The moving van rumbled behind me, a slow reminder that my old life had been boxed up and shipped away. I could barely remember the last few weeks in the city, days blurred by job applications and uncomfortable silences with my ex-husband. He had said nothing about me leaving. Maybe he didn't care anymore. That thought twisted in my stomach. I was tired of carrying anger and grief like a second skin, but even now, I wasn't sure if I was ready to let it go. The house I had rented was older than I expected. White paint peeled from the wooden siding, and the windows were small, but sunlight poured in, scattering across the hardwood floors. I stepped inside, dragging my suitcase, and it felt too quiet, too empty. I had imagined this town as a place of escape, a place to rebuild, but now it felt like a mirror reflecting all my doubts. I unpacked slowly, placing each item on the furniture that didn't quite fit. The smell of cedar from the dresser reminded me of my grandmother's house. I hadn't thought about her in years, and now memories came uninvited. Summers in the garden, afternoons filled with laughter and the sound of wind chimes. Those memories were softer than the ones I carried from the city, and for a moment, I allowed myself to breathe without tension. By evening, the streets had emptied. A single lamppost flickered outside my window, casting shadows across the living room. I sipped tea I had brought from home, listening to the quiet hum of the fridge. The phone rang suddenly, and I flinched. It was an old friend from the city, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. She asked about the divorce and the job, and I gave the smallest version of the truth. It felt strange to lie by omission, to shield myself from questions I couldn't answer honestly yet. I went for a walk after hanging up, shoes crunching on the gravel road. The town seemed smaller than I expected, but I noticed details that made it feel alive. A cat slinking along a fence, children's laughter echoing from a park, smoke curling from chimneys. I realized this town had a rhythm I could almost sync with. Almost. I wanted to believe I could belong here, but the ache of my old life tugged at my thoughts, whispering that I didn't deserve peace yet. At the edge of town, a small diner sat under a canopy of oaks. I pushed the door open, greeted by the scent of coffee and bacon. The bell chimed, and a man behind the counter smiled at me, not at my face, but with an acknowledgement that strangers were welcome here. I ordered pancakes and coffee, listening to the low hum of conversation. The voices were soft, casual, human. I realized that I had not heard such ordinary voices for months. The weight in my chest lightened slightly. Returning to the house, I noticed the sky painted with streaks of pink and gold. I leaned against the railing, watching the colors deepen, thinking about what I wanted my new life to be. I couldn't erase the past, but maybe I could choose how it shaped me. I thought about calling my mother, maybe asking for advice, but I hesitated. I needed to figure things out on my own first, even if it scared me. Night came, and I sat by the window, notebook in hand. I wrote what I remembered about the city, about the divorce, about every awkward, sad, and beautiful moment I could summon. Words felt heavy and light at the same time, a strange duality I wasn't ready to name. I paused often, listening to the wind through the trees, feeling the emptiness around me. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel the possibility of tomorrow without immediate dread. I fell asleep finally, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood. Dreams were scattered, fragments of city life and new beginnings tangled together. I woke before dawn, sunlight filtering through the curtains, and for a fleeting moment, the past didn't feel like a cage. I didn't know how long that feeling would last, but it was enough to keep going for now. The next morning, I explored the town with slow, deliberate steps. Every corner seemed familiar and foreign at the same time. A tiny bookstore caught my eye, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. I pushed the door open, and a small bell jingled. The scent of old paper and wood polish hit me immediately. The owner looked up and smiled faintly, nodding as if welcoming me to a place I hadn't known I needed. I wandered through the aisles, fingers brushing against the spines of books, each one a story waiting to be borrowed, lived. I found a corner with old Vermont history books and settled on a chair. Time slipped by quietly as I read about families who had built this town from scratch, people who had faced hardship yet persisted. I realized I had stumbled into a rhythm not dictated by deadlines or expectations, but by the slow, deliberate pulse of life itself. By afternoon, I needed to check on my new job. The office was a small real estate firm tucked behind a row of shops. I met my colleague, Marcy, a woman in her 40s with a soft voice and quick smile. She introduced me to the office, explained the clients and the system, and shared stories of her own struggles moving from the city years ago. I nodded, realizing I was not alone in seeking a second chance. The feeling was unfamiliar but comforting. Back at the house, boxes still unpacked, I heard the sound of hammering next door. My neighbor, an older man named Hank, waved as I stepped outside. He was fixing the fence, sun catching the gray in his hair. He smiled at me, asked if I needed help with anything. I hesitated, pride tangled with embarrassment, but accepted a small offer for advice on repairing a broken cabinet. Hank was a man of few words, but each one felt deliberate and kind. That evening, I called an old friend from my past life, someone I hadn't reached out to in months. We spoke tentatively, laughter laced with nostalgia and sadness. She reminded me of who I had been before the chaos of divorce and unemployment. I realized the conversation brought a strange clarity. My life hadn't ended. It had just shifted, and I was responsible for what came next. Sleep came later than usual, thoughts buzzing. The quiet of the house felt different now, not empty, but expectant. I walked to the kitchen for a glass of water and noticed the sunlight from the next room casting soft patterns on the floor. I had never considered how much light mattered, how shadows could shape the feel of a room. My senses were more alert here. Every sound, every detail was amplified. Even the smallest things, the creak of stairs, a bird outside, the wind through the trees felt significant. The weekend arrived, and with it, an invitation from Hank to help with yard work. I accepted, unsure why I said yes, but curious about the people in this town who moved with a steady rhythm, unlike the constant rush of city life. Hours passed, and I felt a rare satisfaction as the garden beds were cleared and weeds removed. Hank offered advice, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed freely without pretense. I realized that trust could be built slowly through action, not promises. By Sunday evening, I returned home, exhausted but fulfilled. I brewed tea and sat at the window, watching the sky shift to deep purple and pink. The town seemed calmer now, less like a temporary stop and more like a place I could inhabit. I thought about the past, about the divorce, and the job I had lost, but the sting was softer. Each memory held a lesson or a reminder, not just pain. I could breathe, even if slightly. I decided to walk through the town before bed, taking in the quiet streets. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and I smiled at the small, ordinary sound. I noticed people I had passed in the morning, their routines continuing without hurry or stress. I wondered if I could adapt to this pace, if I could find joy in simplicity. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, a reminder that new beginnings were as fragile as they were necessary. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on my first week. I was not yet healed, not yet settled, but the cracks in my heart felt smaller. The quiet moments, the small gestures of kindness from strangers, the unspoken connections with people like Hank and Marcy, they were shaping me more than I realized. I had expected solitude to be suffocating, but it was teaching me patience, self-reflection, and resilience. I drifted off with the sense that change was gradual, not immediate. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no sudden revelation. Just the slow accumulation of days and choices, the way a river carves through stone over time. I knew the coming weeks would test me, that loneliness might return, that mistakes would be made. But for the first time, I felt the faint stirrings of possibility, a life that was mine to shape, in a place that might, eventually, feel like home. Monday morning arrived with a soft drizzle, the sky heavy and gray. I walked to the office, my coat pulled tightly around me, noticing how the town seemed quieter under rain. The streets glistened with wet asphalt, leaves sticking to the pavement. I thought about the small routines I had begun: morning coffee, the bookstore on the corner, greeting Hank as he went about his repairs. They grounded me, gave me something to hold on to amid uncertainty. Marcy welcomed me into the office with a fresh stack of client files. She suggested we start the day reviewing the properties that needed immediate attention. I nodded, trying to appear confident, though anxiety gnawed at the edges of my focus. The town's pace was slower than I expected, but work moved in its own rhythm. Some clients were cautious, others eager. I observed, asked questions, and slowly started understanding the nuances that had eluded me in the city. By mid-morning, a call came from a longtime client requesting a showing. I agreed, and Marcy offered tips on negotiating and maintaining patience. I followed her advice, though my hands trembled slightly as I took notes. Driving through narrow streets lined with maple trees dripping with rain, I felt a strange serenity. The houses weren't imposing or ostentatious. They were modest, lived in, human. Each one seemed to tell a story, a history, intertwined with the people who had called it home. After the showing, I returned to the office, feeling the subtle exhaustion that comes from learning and adapting. Marcy smiled knowingly and offered me a cup of tea. Her quiet encouragement reminded me that even small victories counted. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel competent, capable, not just a displaced woman trying to rebuild. The realization was almost shocking. I had forgotten how it felt to feel grounded, to know that effort could translate into progress. Returning home, I noticed the smell of fresh rain mingling with the scent of pine and damp earth. The air felt alive, almost cleansing. Hank was outside again, painting a small section of his porch. He waved, nodding toward my house as if reminding me that progress came slowly but surely. I offered a tentative smile and a wave back, feeling the strange weight of gratitude. His presence was a steady reminder that trust and connection weren't immediate. They were earned through consistency and care. Later, I unpacked more boxes, uncovering items I had forgotten: a photograph of my parents in Vermont, a journal filled with half-finished thoughts, an old scarf from a friend I had lost touch with. Each object carried memory and emotion, some bittersweet, some comforting. I realized that reclaiming space wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a way to align my surroundings with the life I wanted to rebuild. Evening came, and I made a simple dinner, listening to the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows. I thought about my ex-husband, about conversations left unfinished, apologies never given. Anger and sorrow still lingered, but they were tempered by distance and reflection. I understood that holding on to resentment served no one. Instead, I could focus on presence, on the people here, on myself, on choices that could shape the next chapter. After dinner, I went for a walk along the edge of town, where the hills met the river. Mist hovered above the water, blurring edges and softening the world. I could see lights from a distant farmhouse, flickering like faint promises. I stopped to watch a pair of ducks navigating the current, moving together in silence. The simplicity of the scene struck me. Life could continue, even when fractured, even when uncertain. The following day, I encountered a client struggling with paperwork. I guided them patiently, noticing how small gestures, a smile, clear instructions could ease tension. The experience reminded me that I was capable of empathy and skill at the same time. I felt pride, not loud or showy, but quiet and steady, the kind that builds slowly and lasts longer than momentary triumphs. By the week's end, I had begun forming tentative friendships. I met a woman at the local cafe who shared stories of her children and her small garden, and I listened, absorbing the rhythms of this life. I realized that connection didn't need to be immediate or intense. It could be small, cumulative, a series of moments that slowly formed a network of trust and understanding. Late one night, I journaled by candlelight, reflecting on the week. The rain had stopped, leaving streets glossy and reflective. I wrote about fear and resilience, about the sting of endings and the quiet thrill of beginnings. Each word felt deliberate, a step toward understanding, a way to articulate hope that was fragile but present. I closed the journal, sensing the subtle shift within me. I was no longer only surviving. I was slowly inhabiting this new life. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the town. I lingered at the kitchen window, watching the dew glisten on the rooftops and the scent of wet earth rising from the streets. It was a quiet day, but something in the calm suggested change, as if the world was waiting for me to step forward. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring warmth and the fleeting peace of a morning without obligations or reminders of failure. I had a meeting with a new client, someone hesitant about selling her home. Driving there, I reflected on how far I had come. My hands no longer shook, my mind no longer raced with doubt. I greeted her politely, listening carefully as she described the memories tied to her house. Her words stirred something in me, the recognition that every person carried stories, regrets, hopes. I found myself asking questions, offering reassurance, realizing that empathy and professionalism could coexist. Afterward, I walked through the town square, noticing small details I had missed. A child balancing on the curb, laughing, a woman walking her dog, exchanging greetings with neighbors. Life moved gently here, grounded in simplicity and familiarity. I thought about the contrast between this pace and the chaos I had left behind. In the city, I had been surrounded by noise and urgency, but rarely had I felt truly present. Here, I could breathe, notice, reflect. Hank stopped by unexpectedly, carrying a toolbox and a grin. He offered to help fix a leak in my kitchen sink, claiming it was simple, though I doubted it. Together, we worked in silence, listening to the drip of water and the occasional tap of a hammer. He spoke sparingly, yet his words carried weight, small pieces of advice, practical wisdom, hints of his own life woven into casual conversation. I realized I was learning from him without even noticing. Connection wasn't always verbal. Sometimes it was shared effort, mutual understanding without words. Later that evening, I ran into Marcy at the local market. She mentioned an opportunity for me to assist with a new property listing, something requiring initiative and problem-solving. I felt a surge of cautious excitement. For the first time in weeks, I considered my own potential rather than past mistakes. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, the duality of stepping into responsibility after a period of stagnation. Back home, I unpacked another box of personal items, discovering letters from my ex-husband, apologies I had long ignored. I read them carefully, acknowledging the complexity of our past. Anger still lingered, but the sharp edges had dulled. I understood that reconciliation didn't necessarily mean resuming what was lost. It could mean acceptance, the ability to carry forward without bitterness. My reflection on these letters made me consider the broader implications of forgiveness, not for him, but for my own peace. The rain returned that night, gentle and persistent, drumming on the roof and windows. I lit a candle and wrote in my journal, my thoughts flowing freely. Memories of the city, the pain of divorce, the anxiety of starting over, and the cautious hope that was now emerging. Writing felt like a conversation with myself, a way to untangle emotion from circumstance. I noted small victories, the way I navigated new clients, the ease of interaction with neighbors, the sense of agency returning. A knock at the door interrupted my reflection. It was Sarah, an acquaintance from the bookstore, holding a tray of homemade muffins. She smiled, explaining she thought I might enjoy company. I invited her in, and we shared tea, chatting quietly about books, small-town life, and mutual frustrations. Her presence reminded me that friendship could be gentle and unassuming, a stark contrast to the dramatic relationships I had left behind. Connection, I realized, could be healing in its quiet simplicity. As the evening wore on, I walked outside, umbrella in hand, noticing the reflections of streetlights and puddles. The town had a rhythm of its own, one that I could learn to move with rather than resist. I thought about my plans, tentative and uncertain, yet filled with possibility. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't dictated by loss, but shaped by conscious choice. The sensation was delicate, but real, a fragile hope, steady enough to sustain me. Before bed, I checked the mailbox. A letter from an old friend arrived, words of encouragement and shared memories. I felt a warmth that surprised me, the realization that support could arrive unexpectedly from those who knew me long before the upheaval. Closing my journal, I allowed myself a moment of gratitude, acknowledging the slow but meaningful reconstruction of my life. The fear of uncertainty remained, but it was tempered by awareness, resilience, and a growing sense of agency. Night settled over the town, quiet and soft, the hum of life continuing below. I stood at the window, staring at the hills that framed the horizon, imagining the possibilities that awaited. Small victories, quiet friendships, the rhythm of a life rebuilt, these were the threads I would weave into the tapestry of my new existence. The process was gradual, but I no longer doubted that I could move forward. The morning light spilled across my kitchen table, soft and persistent, as if urging me to rise and meet the day. I lingered, sipping my coffee slowly, listening to the quiet rhythm of the town waking. There was no rush, no pressing deadlines, only the gentle hum of life moving steadily forward. I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm, one that had taken months to cultivate, rooted in acceptance and patience rather than accomplishment or recognition. I decided to walk to the lake before work, the path lined with familiar trees and the scent of damp earth. The water mirrored the sky, calm and reflective. I thought about the past months, the divorce, the loss of employment, the relentless self-doubt, and how each challenge had pushed me toward this moment of clarity. Life had stripped me to essentials, leaving me with the bare truth of myself and the quiet resilience I hadn't acknowledged before. At the edge of the lake, I noticed small signs of life. Ducks gliding across the water, leaves trembling in the wind, the distant laughter of children playing near the shore. Each detail grounded me, reminding me that continuity existed even amidst disruption. I felt a shift inside, subtle but undeniable, a readiness to engage with life fully, to embrace its unpredictability without fear. The weight of past failures was still present, but it no longer dominated my perception. Returning home, I checked my emails and found a message from Marcy about a new project. It required creativity, initiative, and collaboration. I hesitated briefly, recalling the anxieties of my former city life, but then I smiled. This time, fear was tempered by experience, tempered by the awareness that mistakes were temporary and growth inevitable. I drafted a reply, measured and confident, committing to participation. Hank stopped by again, offering advice about minor repairs and local contacts. We laughed over past mishaps, the ease of camaraderie contrasting sharply with the tensions I had endured in my previous life. Small gestures, shared moments, and practical support had become my lifeline. I realized that community wasn't an abstract concept. It was tangible, composed of people willing to be present without expectation, offering ordinary kindness that felt extraordinary in its steadiness. Later, I met with my colleague, Claire, at a cafe. We discussed logistics, strategies, and potential obstacles. I contributed ideas freely, observing the collaborative energy between us. For the first time in months, I felt my mind align seamlessly with my actions. The pressure of past failure no longer dictated my confidence. I could operate in uncertainty and still feel grounded. Returning home that evening, I noticed the sunset casting pink and orange hues across the rooftops. I paused, inhaling the crisp air, feeling it fill my lungs and cleanse lingering doubts. The day's accomplishments were modest, yet deeply satisfying. I thought about the letter from my friend, the support of Hank, the encouragement from Marcy and Claire, threads weaving together a network of possibility. Connection, collaboration, and personal growth were no longer distant ideals. They were lived experiences. As night settled, I lit a candle and reflected in my journal. I wrote about fear, loss, uncertainty, and the small victories that had slowly accumulated. I acknowledged the complexity of emotions, the sadness intertwined with hope, grief tempered by curiosity, hesitation balanced by courage. My words flowed uninterrupted, a mirror of the evolving self I had come to recognize. Writing had become a ritual of clarity, a tool to process, understand, and plan forward. I prepared dinner, simple and nourishing, feeling grounded in the rhythm of daily life. While cooking, I noticed the soft glow from the street lamp outside, illuminating the path to neighbors' homes. The familiarity of the town, its predictable yet comforting cycles, gave me a sense of stability I had longed for but rarely experienced. Stability here didn't feel stagnant. It felt alive, supportive, and empowering. Later, as I read before bed, I reflected on the journey. Each step from loss, uncertainty, and isolation to small achievements, relationships, and personal growth had been necessary. I recognized that life was a mosaic of moments, some painful, some joyous, each contributing to a coherent whole. Acceptance wasn't about resignation. It was about understanding, choosing action, and cultivating hope amid imperfection. Before sleep, I stepped to the window and looked at the stars. The town was quiet, yet full of life in unseen corners. I felt an intimate connection to this place, to myself, and to the possibilities that lay ahead. The fear of starting over had diminished, replaced by recognition that change, though challenging, was also fertile. I could choose growth, patience, and courage daily, nurturing them like seedlings in my life's small garden. Lying down, I allowed myself to rest fully. I embraced the imperfections of the past, the uncertainties of the present, and the subtle promise of the future. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly present, reconciled with myself and ready to move forward with purpose. The world was not perfect, but I had discovered the resilience and clarity to navigate it with intention. The quiet acceptance that settled over me felt like home, a state of mind, a condition of heart, a gentle acknowledgement that life, with all its complexities, could be lived fully and with awareness.